Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, or whenever you happen to be listening to this. Welcome to the Film Realist Podcast, the film and TV podcast from a complete nobody that is hopefully for somebody. Episode 105 is going to be maybe the start of a tradition, maybe not. Maybe it'll be more of a one-off, like one of the shows I'm going to be talking about today. With 2024 summer coming to an end, I decided that because there wasn't a major release that I wanted to discuss, I wanted to find a time and space to discuss all the television shows or movies that I haven't been able to fit into episodes. I do like to have a typical runtime, but ironically, this episode's going to be longer than normal. So, with this week's episode, I will be reviewing House of the Dragon Season 2, Umbrella Academy Season 4, The Boys Season 4, Watchmen Chapter 1, It Ends With Us, and Star Wars Season, I guess it's not season, the only season of Star Wars, The Acolyte. All of these reviews will be full of spoilers, so if you have not had a chance yet to watch any of these things, that's okay. I'm hoping at least one portion of the episode will be for you. Let's start with Star Wars, The Acolyte, maybe the most talked about show in this batch. Who's to say?
You carry a Jedi weapon, but you are no Jedi.
Star Wars The Acolyte is the first live-action or television film adaptation of this new era of the Star Wars universe, this being the High Republic, which is Disney's version of the Old Republic, which expanded universe fans of Star Wars would long time know, but there's only so much stuff that can be expected for people to watch. I'm slowly working my way through the audiobooks, and I'm enjoying them, but unfortunately, as everybody will know, probably listening to this, is The Acolyte was actually canceled, which is interesting given the reception to this, which unfortunately I probably have to address, which is in recent years with Star Wars fandom, there has been a large vocal grouping that is very negative, and its negativity has nothing to do with the actual storytelling. While there is, of course, going to be criticism of the creative aspects of that show, which, if constructive to some degree, of course, you're always going to get that. But in terms of the inclusiveness that this show represents, Amalda Stenberg is an actress of color, the first, I believe, who is leading a Star Wars show, and happens to also, I believe, be bisexual. Not that that actually matters in the grand scheme of things, but people find anything that is not supporting their sad white boy narrative and decide to attack anybody involved with these Star Wars products. And the visceral nature to which this is occurring is really unfortunate. And I thought Rick and Morty fans in this bad camp were bad. That's a terrible sentence, but it's been a very long day. And it's unfortunate that as a Star Wars fan who loves to see new ideas and new faces brought to this brand that was not super diverse in its origins and is being more reflective of the multicultural grouping that specifically we have all over the world, is quite unfortunate. My review will be what the show presented, what plot elements it introduces, its structure, performances probably to some degree, but that is what I'm discussing. I think it is amazing that Leslie Headland came into this with clearly an idea, but where I felt a lot of the Star Wars television shows have failed is in their construction and the setup to how stories are being revealed. And I'll get further into that in just a second, but it really does feel as if there is no plan with how the execution of these shows is going to fill out a grander scale. The Mandalorian almost feels like it kind of fell into that, and I'm really hoping moving forward with Disney Plus, anything, Marvel, Star Wars, any Lucasfilm product really, that from the get-go, a plan is established prior, a show Bible. The irony is these things have been elements of television shows for such a long time, and Disney not choosing to do that is bewildering because they're a studio that is over 100 years old. But apparently they thought they knew better. Who's to say? That's the second time I've said that in this episode. The Star Wars The Acolyte's actual story I found to be quite interesting. An element of more recent Star Wars stories where we are actually evaluating and investigating what it truly meant to be a Jedi, and the repercussions of an expectation of its knights and masters, which is, it was, for lack of a better description, they are priests who have to be celibate and one with the Force and serve the Republic, the High Republic in this current era, and showing that it was not this pristine, perfect organization is an element I love from The Last Jedi, which is they're an organization of failure. At all major conflicts, we see they've lost. They lost in the prequel trilogy. They lost leading into the New Republic. At some point, the Jedis have always failed because either that's ego, oversight. It's a really interesting dynamic, particularly because, as we've seen in some of the new expanded universe content from Disney, we see how the Jedi don't really affect the day-to-day people. It's one of the elements I loved most about the Clone Wars, which was seeing stories on the ground level, because the Jedi are typically, and sometimes literally, above all of that. Master Soul as a character, played by Lee Jung-jae, is a very compelling character, but what I really didn't enjoy and felt hurt the show, which is a Jedi Master having flaws, is already a compelling character. The most interesting Jedis that we have followed have flaws. How they deal with those, how they struggle as real people, makes them easily more identifiable and relatable. It's what works about Anakin's fall when you include 7 seasons of Star Wars Clone Wars more compelling than just the flip of a switch in Star Wars Revenge of the Sith, which is what it is. Without the expanded universe, it's quite laughable. Introducing a character like Master Soul, who clearly, he has said, Lee Jung-jae, from his inspirations of Liam Neeson from Qui-Gon Jinn, is somebody with flaws and has made bad decisions. Even though he's done those things, he's doing them because he's trying to do the right thing. Those are character traits to be commended. And the structure of reveals in this season prevent us from getting to know the full facet of him as a character, which hurts the storytelling, in my opinion. If we had seen his flaws from up front and throughout the 8 episodes, we get to see why he's made those decisions, it would make the journey that we go through him much more rewarding. Because the show decides to hide those things from us, the execution comes off as poor. Or, and I don't know this, I was not in the writer's room for this show, is it because you were coming up with these ideas afterwards? Again, if you are writing only 8 episodes or 8 hours, which I don't believe the show winds up being in its full runtime, come up with the full 8-hour story from the start. Don't write episode at a time. That's how network television did that. You have the benefit of no firm release dates should allow creatively you to come up with a more succinct vision. Elements of this show seem to fail from that. Having 2 twins with Osha and May be mirror reflections of each other, and the dichotomy between those 2 characters and how they flip back and forth with the perspective of the light side and the dark side of the Force is really interesting. But because we spend so little time with them throughout certain aspects of the show, the turns don't feel fully formed. Osha flipping to the dark side at the end of the show does hurt the twist because of elements being hidden from us. If we spent more time with her, with, what is his name? I don't want to get it wrong, with the stranger, with Manny Jacinto more frequently, or Chimere, that twist or her turn would be much more compelling. And that to me is what's really frustrating. From the pitch of Star Wars Acolyte, I think it would have been a really interesting show, but because of hiding things from us so that we feel a certain way, and I can understand that to some degree if you're trying to hide somebody as a villain. The show doesn't point or put Soul in the villain category. He is a hero from the get-go. He is one of our main leads. We do have villains, I would argue to some degree, with Vernestra Rao. That Jedi Master it really fits in that perspective. Like, these Jedis are not necessarily great people. They have goals. They have things they want to do. She is a membership of the leadership within the Jedi Order. And that element is really interesting. And I like the fact that they did introduce somebody we won't like. Even though she is on the side of the light, having a compelling antagonist makes Sol more compelling because we know he's trying to do the right thing. Again, hiding that backstory from us wouldn't necessarily have worked. The action in the show is very well done. Leslie Headland did talk about the fact that she wanted a lot of these fights to feel reminiscent of something like Duel of the Fates. And the final battle between Kymar and Master Sol is very much of that. And this is not to be dismissive, but it's very well choreographed, overdone sometimes, while then also throwing in elements of classic kung fu, like wire work from something like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon was amazing. Showing Jedi Masters at a level we have absolutely not seen from them before. That's one of the benefits of the High Republic era. As we see them in the prequels, and then if you go into the original trilogy, they are shadows of the capabilities of the former Jedi Masters. These are the best they're ever going to be, and seeing them use the Force in really succinct and unique ways was awesome, specifically from the visuals. I did say in my 2-episode reaction that Carrie-Anne Moss's character is another person where, because they kill her in the beginning, which does work for the stakes of the show, specifically with how talented Mai is with using the Force. But that character, we learn more and more from her, not really somebody we should be supporting, which is unfortunate. And because of that, a lot of the structure for this made the show less compelling for me. The story as a whole, I really did like, but as the ratings showed, episode by episode, it was dropping. Whether that's a group of people systematically choosing to not watch the show, I don't have any patience or time for that. But if you were just watching this show for Star Wars, the execution fails, I believe, what the goal was for this show, which was quite frustrating. It was something I really enjoyed, particularly elements that were teased for the future, such as Darth Plagueis, the first time we've ever seen him before in live action or any real adaptation to any live or viewable media to my knowledge. Now, somebody might say that I was incorrect with that statement, but I don't remember seeing him before, which was amazing. And because this show is not going to be moving forward, I'll be really curious how Disney is going to pivot with their High Republic era. The books are never going to sell as well as streaming memberships. So Star Wars is in this weird era right now. James Mangold has been announced to be making a film in this era. When is that going to be taking place? This show takes place approximately 100 years before Star Wars. And we know that James Mangold's film, which was announced, is supposed to be essentially the dawn of the Jedi. So what is that going to be? I don't know. It's unfortunate that Star Wars finally doing something interesting and new with Star Wars. New could be argued, but essentially carving out their own path with an era of Star Wars that could take inspiration from previous works, but still allow them to do something that we haven't seen before, is not going to be moving forward. The worst aspect of this cancellation to me is that regardless of them actually having an impact, people who were just outright bullies, trolls, homophobes, xenophobes get to pat themselves on the back that the show was not a success. And unfortunately, it's just the state we're in. If this is a response similar to what happened with The Last Jedi and the course correction, that film still managed to gross over $1 billion, which I believe probably would have been the financial goal for Disney and Lucasfilm back in 2017. But as a whole, the Star Wars brand really feels kind of listless at this point. As a longtime fan, I want to be excited about this stuff. Everything I had heard from the first footage being shown to this at D23, which I believe was last year, was quite exciting. I believe Rob Keyes was there and said this is the thing to be excited about. I did a trailer reaction for Skeleton Crew, which does look fun. Goonies and Star Wars / Stranger Things. I really hope that is the case, but building an excitement in for this brand is something that Star Wars feels it needs to regain. I hope it still manages to be creative. And inclusion does not mean a detriment to storytelling. I personally just want, and a lot of people want to see themselves reflected in media, unlike a lot of these eras when they weren't necessarily the case, which is unfortunate, but hopefully it continues to be more inclusive as we've seen from a lot of these other products. So, and I hate calling them that, but at the end of the day, that's what these companies look at these things as. So, kind of wrapping all this up, I liked The Acolyte. At the end of the day, it's a story I enjoyed watching. Its execution didn't manage the concepts that I was excited about seeing. So there are characters we probably won't see again for a long time or ever again. And to me, that's quite disappointing. I have nothing else to say about the show. If you want to watch it, it is still on Disney Plus for now. I really hope that it doesn't get pulled off like some other Disney Plus things that weren't successful, Willow. But it being part of the Star Wars brand, it's tough to say what we are going to see from the High Republic. But it's an era I'm interested in, so if we get the movie first or another TV show, I really don't know what we are going to get from it. Now that I'm done my Acolyte review, why don't we jump into The Boys Season 4?
I look back at my life, and all I see are the messes I made. And I ain't got time to fix it.
If you're a longtime listener of the podcast, or if you've just listened this summer, I did cover the first 4 episodes on an earlier episode this summer. I can't remember specifically which episode that was, but I'll leave it in the show notes. So we're talking about the back half of The Boys, which is really interesting because I enjoyed season 3 of the show quite a bit. It came to an end just after, it came to an end in July of 2022, just before the podcast started. So I've talked very minimally about my love of the show. Its reflection on what is going on with modern politics has been unnerving to some degree. It's insane that a show like this, which is pushing the envelopes in so many directions, whether that be with storytelling, grotesque violence, or the geopolitical nature of the United States of America, is becoming less and less like fiction. And as that clip leading into this discussed, which is Butcher's character evaluation, was really interesting to me, and it's a twist I want to discuss overall. It's an element I love that Eric Kripke has brought back, which is bringing in actors that have been in Supernatural, great actors. Jensen Ackles really getting to sink his teeth into something else with Soldier Boy, and then Jeffrey Dean Morgan, spoilers, everyone, this is spoilers for everything, Jeffrey Dean Morgan being the true horrible mirror for what Butcher could be if he let all of his worst impulses take over, was a phenomenal twist. And ironically, it's hilarious that I'm doing this now, something that If fails to do, which is you don't, because of the setup of all of the instances in which we see Butcher talking to him, you're never consciously thinking about what could be happening with that character. He's just there, and you buy the fact that he is somebody Butcher has a past with, and the reveal that, for one, he was a real person, but also he is dead, and part of Butcher's guilt has built him in, and wrapping all of that around where we get to see Butcher's wife be the positive light that he is seeing, and Butcher's V powers coming through and him completely blacking out, and this character really not knowing what he's supposed to be doing. And the death of Victoria Newman was not something I had predicted whatsoever. And the coup that is being slowly built into this government, and really amping up towards what a final season of a show that I am so excited for. It's really unfortunate it's probably not going to come out until like 2025 or 2026 at the earliest. This gap between television shows, obviously there's been the writer's strike and the Screen Actors Guild strike, which needed to be done. They needed fair deals. But as an impatient person, I'm going to hate waiting. The relationships between Huey and Starlight, how they evolve, and particularly with Amazon Prime shows, the unfortunate through line through everything I'm going to talk about today is going to be about childhood or adult trauma and the damage done to somebody's psychology and how that affects decisions you make then, how you grow up, and then the mental illnesses that can ensue because of those things. With Mother's Milk, MM truly having anxiety, resulting in a panic attack where he passes out while they are on a mission because he is the leader, and all of the things he has to deal with, specifically with his wife and daughter. And all of these elements build in for a season that I was not expecting to like as nearly as much as season 3, but every single episode layering in how screwed everybody is on the boys, and with Homelander slowly but surely unraveling, again, because of his childhood growing up being this weapon, but seeing that he is being given permission by the worst of the United States of America to be his worst self and truly take over. Seeing humans for the ants that they are. Getting to a worse deep, didn't think it was something I was expecting, but him truly becoming the worst of himself, and the whole United States unraveling because the worst people, the worst Americans are taking over, building in for a climax that just absolutely blew my mind. Kimiko finally screaming no, her relationship with Frenchie, and the back and forth that they've gone through. Frenchie, none of these people on The Boys are Boy Scouts of any kind, but they're the protagonists that the show has chosen with us to follow. And it's the irony is coming off of talking about the Acolyte that we're allowed to see all of their flaws. We get to see more, this being a show that's now in its 4th season, how it's unraveled the balls of yarn that are these characters' backstories, has continually added more layers. And it's not been strategically hidden because they wanted us to love them. We continue to see the mistakes and the challenges that they've faced. Frenchie even falling in love with somebody, and he is the person who is responsible for that person's loss of his entire family. And the tension that builds with these characters' relationships, because we know eventually every piece of excrement is going to hit the fan, and how is this going to unravel is absolutely spectacular. The Boys is an absolute must show, and it's doing everything with each season on whether focusing on a specific part of society or continually to add building blocks and build out this universe for what I'm assuming is going to be a human versus Soup's war, which is, again, interesting because there's a show I'm going to be talking about. I don't think that manages to pace itself out like that at all. But again, another element of The Boys that I love so much is it gives us twists on characters we know, where we got a Spider-Man character that was hilarious and disgusting. And one thing I would like to see the show do a little bit less of, which is torture Huey, because he can only go through so much. But also Huey's development and how he is hardening as a character, where if all of these things that had happened in season 4 had happened to Huey, he would have had a nervous breakdown, and he probably would have, taken his own life, instituted himself to deal with all of this trauma. Every single character's relationships and the major dynamics continually are evolving or deepening, or to some degree twisting on their head, where I really don't know how the characters are going to get out from their solutions. At the end of the show, the big cliffhanger, and this is what it is for all intents and purposes, but it's done and executed well, is each and every character is trying to escape the Seven and Vought because they no longer are associated with the CIA. We learn that the vice president had planned an attack on, he is the president-elect, had planned an attack on Victoria Newman, and that gets out, so he's impeached. And because Victoria Newman is dead, the Speaker of the House, I can't remember his name, winds up becoming president, and he enacts that all of the Soups from Vought are essentially deputized, which I think means they can function as police officers. I probably should have looked into that, but I didn't. And martial law is now in place, so they are in charge of everything. And it is insane to me that we have one more season with 8 more episodes of the show. I'm really excited to see how each and every character's story is going to come to an end. I certainly expect we are going to lose people we love in a way that we did early on in Game of Thrones. How Soldier Boy is going to react to what's going on. We obviously learned he was not the Star-Spangled Man we had expected in season 3, but with his emergence being confirmed, I'm at a loss for words because Eric Kripke has said he's done 5 seasons of a show before. Obviously, we know Supernatural went for another 10 years, but each season of the show has built my anticipation for the ending. And getting to see just desserts, we know bad people in this universe. Karma is still a law of the universe. And I'm really hoping to see that that's the case. And I'm fingers crossed we still get some happiness for the other characters. It manages to do what The Boys does well, which is the action is gripping. It is grotesque and violent at times, but the story is the major selling point. And the execution of this story is not, at times, nothing is going to be perfect, but The Boys still manages to continually push the envelope, literally and figuratively, all at once. And season 5, for whenever it comes out, it's something I'm going to be looking forward to. So the fact that we are getting a Gen V from this, I'm not sure if that necessarily comes out before season 5 of The Boys. I would expect it does. It says here 2025. So there were some elements of that connected to this that I really enjoyed. I'm hoping that it continually explains what's going on. We did get some teases as to what's going on with the soup-killing virus that was brought into season 4. But man, I'm excited for this. What's Ryan's relationship going to be if he does meet Soldier Boy? There are so many phenomenal unanswered questions, and not in a way where it's a mystery box, which some other shows have done before. I'm really looking forward to this, and if you haven't watched The Boys yet, yes, it is dour and unfortunately a realistic perspective on what's going on now. Fingers crossed after November, maybe not, but regardless, it is worth your time. It is one of the best streaming shows right now, and I highly recommend it if you can't tell from this review. Let's move on to House of the Dragon Season 2.
The dragons dance, and men are like dust under their feet.
House of the Dragon Season 2 starts off very shortly after the last season, and so cards on the table. I've struggled with this show. If you go all the way back to episode 15 of the podcast when I reviewed the first season, I thought that the show's construction, why all these things have through lines that I wasn't planning until, because I think most listeners who are frequent to this podcast will know I don't write these reviews ahead of time. I might think of something beforehand, but rarely have I written something out. So it's a coherent thought. I don't know if you can ever tell. It's never a coherent thought. The two significant time jumps in season 1 were jarring and a failure of telling a structured story in a coherent way. This show, fortunately, doesn't do any of those anymore. But first off, the show is a mess to begin with this season. Aside from all of my issues with season 1, first off, you have an ending, a cliffhanger, I would argue, where you have the death of one of Rhaenyra's sons. And you would think that this would be the spark to light the torch or the flame to start the dragon war amongst the Targaryens. But it doesn't, which feels like an e-break on the momentum to this show, which was frustrating. We now know that the show is only going to be 4 seasons long, which is really interesting given how much we still have to do, especially at the end of this. And then this season kind of muddles around, what are we doing here? And eventually it sits on, we're preventing the war. You get Rhaenyra, who does not want anything to do with that in terms of preventing. She's obviously super mad. And then we get the death of a different Targaryen kid, not the one that we were planning. And with Matt Smith's character, I found it really interesting because his introduction was very, very interesting to me. Daemon really had a Littlefinger-esque-ness about him, which was very interesting, not in a way where it felt repetitive. What worked so well in the original Game of Thrones was everyone is playing the Game of Thrones. Everyone has their own objectives and goals. And Daemon feeling slighted because he was not chosen to be king of the 7 kingdoms from his brother, but it was given to Rhaenyra. And this is a really interesting dynamic that could build in with them eventually finding each other, but Daemon's still holding on to this. And what I found interesting was Daemon goes to the castle of character development where he sees all of these visions, which I'm making fun of it, but they were very compelling, specifically seeing young Rhaenyra, or we see, my brain is mush, what was his name? Jaharis there falling apart, which again, from the first season was a phenomenal visual. Literally the person who was trying to be a good king, but the Iron Throne is literally eating him alive. Or I guess metaphorically, but literally to some degree as well. And where I really didn't like this show was specifically with the portrayal of Alicent, who is somebody who feels so wronged by Rhaenyra's family with the defacing, quite literally, of her son losing an eye, the way that Aegon was told to be king. The fact that we have two actual face-to-face conversations with Rhaenyra and Alicent, that pretty much establishes where they've gone from this show. Rhaenyra not wanting to lead to war, but ultimately realizes this is the case, and she has her own story that she goes through, which is especially interesting, and I will get to it in a minute. But Alicent, literally his last name is Hightower. Her father is just kicked off the show, and why was Otto Hightower fired from being Hand of the King? Well, he had to go shoot Venom 3, everybody, and this is how scheduling works when you're on to major projects. And then we get to see him at the end. Woohoo! Alicent goes on, ironically, a similar adventure through this story with her, similar to her father, which is she was the Queen Regent, and then she's just there at the table because she was the former queen, and then eventually she gets scuttled away by her own son when she becomes Prince Regent to his own brother, who I know that we have no real witnesses for this, but he clearly is trying to kill his brother and defaces him literally. He gets two-faced, everybody. Aegon gets two-faced by his own brother, and nobody is going, Aegon, no. That's a deep cut for my jump on the Batwagon friends. And her character's fall from grace is honestly kind of rewarding because she's a character who, unfortunately, because of her place, born a woman in Westeros, has to literally marry to achieve status, and is very much just booted in that direction by her father, marrying Jaharis after his wife has died, and then birthing Aegon and all the other Targaryen kids. Slowly but surely, she loses confidence with everybody, with Christian, with her own kids, and at some point she gets pregnant. I'm assuming it's Christian's to some degree. We don't actually see her sleep with anybody else, so of course it would be his. I don't know why I questioned if it was his or not, but Rhaenyra's story was the one that I found more compelling. But because a lot of this is feeling like we have to tell a story because we don't want to do the war yet, was really interesting. You could see people being put in their places as if it was a game board. Oh, it's like, okay, by the end of the show, everyone's going to be here, 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 and here. And it's a lot of setup. It doesn't feel like effective buildup where you're excited to see the character development of this season. Rhaenyra's story is the only one I found compelling. My hesitancy getting back into the show, probably why it's taken so long for me to talk about it, is I didn't really like very many of the people, but Rhaenyra's perspective on, for one, her children not being born of her actual husband. They're from Strong, who is killed off, and again, suffers from, you're introduced in the flat when we've jumped forward in time, and you're supposed to matter now. But his sons, her sons, well, his and her, but Rhaenyra's sons having dark hair being a clear message that their Targaryen bloodline may not be what it's supposed to be. Them dealing with that, them still being young but not having dragons, so they can't really help out mom. And because of this and the dragon that is over at King's Landing, I keep forgetting the name of this guy. Aemond, that's his name, has the biggest dragon on which is Vhagar, I think. I've never been good at remembering the dragons' names because they're said very rarely. Realizing I can't beat Vhagar, my best dragon is killed off, and that is a tragic passing of that character. Unfortunately, it only being 2 seasons into the show, I probably should remember what her name is, but I can't. I know she is Jaharis's wife. I don't remember what it was. I'm trying to look at it really quickly right here, but I cannot see. Rhaenyra's, the older cousin, yeah. Renee's? I don't remember, and I'm sorry. I watched 3 of these episodes and then didn't watch for close to a month. That story, I appreciated it. Card, again, everyone who knows me knows I'm a huge fan of Warrior, and seeing Detective Chief Bill from Warrior show up in this was absolutely amazing to me. And it was really funny because when he was introduced, Kieran Boo, I went, well, that's Bill. Why is he in this show? He's a recognizable actor. Now, to most, he probably wouldn't be, but if you're a fan of Warrior, you'd be like, okay, he's a working guy. Why is he in this? And as that character slowly was shown more and more, I found myself very invested in his story. Him being somebody who is the bastard son of a Targaryen. He's given the blonde hair, or almost white hair. He has no status of that. And you know what? He becomes one of the dragon riders from Targaryen bloodline that are not of noble birth. And all of that to me is really interesting, where Rhaenyra has built out this ragtag group of unwanted people, and adding on top of that, where we see Daemon back in the character development castle, he quite literally sees the Song of Ice and Fire and sees where she is. And it's an unfortunate element, which is that he doesn't come to this realization on his own. He just has to be shown it by the spooky castle. He's not put through an experience of his own volition that leads to him changing his mind. He just has to be shown, you're a part of this game. You're a pawn, dude. You ain't the king, which is a little lazy, and why I think I found myself way less compelled to watch episode to episode. This did feel a little bit like work. A lot of these conversations that these characters have are interesting at times, but it just feels like, well, we've got to move the story along as opposed to we have an interesting story to tell, which is frustrating given this is the Game of Thrones show that got made. It is nice to know they are only doing 4 seasons, so hopefully everybody involved. I understand if you're unaware of this. We had showrunners change between seasons, so hopefully moving forward, we have consistency, and scheduling consistency, which allows the story to really feel consistent and purposeful. Leading into season 3, there feels like we're finally getting to this war that we've been building up now for 2 seasons. I'm going to be really disappointed if it's not. Everybody pretty much is mobilizing for this. We see the Lannisters have gone and gotten pirates. Everybody's made their agreements or banner guards and said, yeah, everybody's done their Predator handshakes. So I'm looking forward to season 3, but I am disappointed. I'm not excited for this. This has not been able to maintain the level of hype. Now, that would be really difficult because of when Game of Thrones came out, when it did back in, 2010. One thing I have to say before ending this review is that George R. R. Martin, you need to stop telling us what doesn't work with other Game of Thrones projects when you have not finished your books. You don't get an opinion on, you wrote a brief book of this. They're writing everything on their own, essentially, outside of who dies or who makes it forward. Your job is to be writing those books that you have promised people that are waiting on. I have friends who didn't continue the show because they love your book so much. Instead of writing a blog post, maybe write a page of The Winds of Winter. That would be great. That's all I have to say on that. Now let's jump into It Ends With Us.
What do you do for a living?
Neurosurgeon. Is that funny?
Jesus, you're serious.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm aware that a lot of the conversation around this film in particular has been about the behind-the-scenes drama that likely has occurred to some degree, but that doesn't matter for my film review. I have taken the time to watch this movie now 2 times, and I have a perspective on what I think works and what doesn't work about the film. It has nothing to do with whose creative decisions were white or wrong. It has to do with the movie in front of me. Having said that, It Ends With Us is a movie that is tonally inconsistent and suffers creatively because of decisions that likely, in my opinion, go back to the source material. I have not read the book. I don't plan on reading the novel, but I had a similar experience to this. The irony is, people are probably going to laugh because of what I'm going to talk about, where when I watched 50 Shades of Grey, directed by Sam Taylor Johnson, I could tell in the theater how much Sam Taylor Johnson wanted to elevate that source material and make a quality film that is about something that we don't typically see a lot of in media, in that instance being about BDSM. And Justin Baldoni clearly has a serious respect for the context and the content within It Ends With Us. It being a story about domestic violence and wanting to explore not why people stay, but why men harm in particular. And I commend him for continually doing promotion in that avenue of the film. The film is two movies kind of battling all at once, which as a film is unfortunate because this is a subject matter that is not heavily covered. I would argue maybe it shouldn't be because of the impact that it can have. It is a serious problem, and unfortunately, it is a situation that many people experience on all facets of life and clearly can create some sort of cycle of violence, and that is an element of this film. Why this movie doesn't work for me is for one, the marketing of this pitch is almost a romantic comedy that goes wrong, and you would understand why. You can have the conception of the film be the meeting of these two people, but for whatever reason, and people are going to assume this is because I have a personal bias, I don't care at all about Justin Baldoni and Blake Lively's lives or any realm. They're not people I know. They're not friends of mine. It doesn't matter. What I see in front of me is a movie that doesn't work, whether that's because of the script choices or the source material being the novel or acting choices that just don't work. Part of that comes from the fact that, in my mind, whether this is an acting choice or the direction or a combination of both, that Blake Lively falls under a category of actor that I've described as blockbuster actors, which is not to diminish their talent, anything about them at all. There are actors and then there are blockbuster actors. And from what I mean in that, it's where I would say mostly you can understand the range or tools that an actor has for what's required of them in a blockbuster. There are certainly actors in blockbusters that can elevate past the expectations of that genre. There are also actors that clearly seem to work particularly well in blockbusters only. And when they try to make performances or choices in serious films, it doesn't really work. I'm not going to give examples. If you're a longtime listener or a friend of mine, you probably know who I'm talking about. And this film, to me, shows that for whatever reason, the tools in Blake Lively's toolbox didn't match up to what is expected from her. The clip that I have that leads into this, there's a level of flatness to the portrayal of Lily where what's especially interesting to me is that you don't get that from the younger actress who plays her, where that dynamic makes a lot more sense in the film. And I don't understand why Isabella Ferrer provides an avenue into this character that makes a lot of sense, particularly one who's clearly affected by her trauma, her father being somebody who abused her mom. And the film's exploration of that cycle of violence is a commendable one because of what it's trying to say, but the depth to which it explores this subject matter is not one I think you're necessarily expecting. The dynamic between Lily and Ryle is, of course, one of tension, lust, trauma, physical violence. The edges on Ryle are present from the get-go. His introduction is him kicking a chair. And there are small instances before the actual assaults where we see something is not right with this character. And if that's in the source material, I think it does a good job of presenting breadcrumbs that lead to something awful later on. And Justin Baldoni manages to do that. He plays somebody you want to hate, but do understand why Lily does stay, her being somebody who's witnessed this before. And another aspect of the film that just doesn't work for me is that Atlas being somebody who clearly her long lost love and that relationship, he wants nothing wrong or bad to happen to her, and it feels overly protective of her. We see that relationship only in flashbacks because they were with each other as teenagers, and obviously Ryle being this person who acts out violently, clearly, and feels ownership or possessiveness over Lily is problematic, to say the least. For whatever reason, the exploration of this trauma that Lily faces just doesn't present effectively. And to me, that's really disappointing. This being a clearly a very popular book and was going to be a popular movie, whether it was because of I don't know, but Colleen Hoover's choice to want Blake Lively to do it. It's fascinating to me because I've not seen very many things Blake Lively has been in. I've seen Green Lantern and The Shallows, which I thought she was quite good in, but I find it interesting because she had to pretend to be afraid of a shark in that film. And the hollow nature that the exploration goes on is quite disappointing. I didn't expect the film to be something that made you feel uncomfortable throughout the entire experience. We're supposed to feel rejoiced with Lily's escape from this cycle of violence after my brain wanted to say they named the kid Dory. Emerson, after Emerson is born. And a failure of the film in my regard is going back to Justin Baldoni's press, where he wanted to explore why men harm, which is a very compelling, it's a very tough thing to do effectively without always painting people as the bad guy. And not just, this is going to sound so ridiculous. Obviously, harming women is wrong. That should be obvious, but exploring the psychology behind why somebody chooses to act out violently could be an interesting story. And the way that we are introduced to Ryle's trauma, it's teased in the very beginning when he says he dealt with the death of a child as a result of a sibling's firing of a gun. We then learn that affected him. The structure in which that is laid out doesn't work in terms of the structure of the movie. Personally, I think it should have happened much earlier, and to some degree would help explain why Lily does continue to stay. I really did like the way that the film gives us perspective on all of the acts of violence within the film. We get to see Lily's perspective, which is, of course, missing certain details, and of course, the realizations as to what's happened and ultimately what leads her to leave is a horrific experience. I mean, they all are, but obviously the escalation of violence continually elevates throughout the film. And that stuff is done. I commend everybody involved with this because I'm sure it was an uncomfortable situation, but the inconsistency in tone, which was always going to be the case. I'm not saying it wasn't. I get building in the romanticization of the flashbacks and the initial relationship with Ryle and Lily, but the film presents this friendship that Ryle was filling up with lust. He didn't know what to do. As it's presented in the film, that's one evening. The relationship and the possessive nature that he feels about her would make way more sense if they had to be quote unquote friends for a longer period as opposed to one bowling karaoke night. Now, again, obviously Ryle has a lot of trauma and mental health issues, which is likely why he acts the way that he does, but the presentation isn't an in-depth one. It's effective, but the levels aren't there that I was necessarily expecting from this. I think the failure of this film leads back to the source material more than anything else, because the exploration probably is only going to be as deep as the book was able to do. I can understand why this was successful with a lot of people. It probably was an avenue for somebody dealing with trauma to feel touched or acknowledged, and it would be absolutely incredible if reading this or seeing the film helps somebody either deal with their trauma or come to the realization they needed to get out from being stuck in a horrible situation. That is absolutely amazing, and I hope that is the case. But a movie I was really hoping to get a lot more from failed to deliver that, which is unfortunate. Again, as I said in the beginning of this review, I don't care about any of the drama. All I'm looking in front of me is, was this an effective movie? And there were constraints for whatever reason that prevented this from being a cohesive film and story. And that's down to the character, the writing, and the structure of the film as a whole. Again, I wasn't planning on all of these things having these through lines of inconsistent structure or creative vision, but apparently that is the case. So it is what it is. If you are a fan of the book, you will like the movie, but going in blind to this as a film, I don't expect you to enjoy this experience. You probably shouldn't. It was disappointing. I don't have any other way to say it other than it was disappointing. Now, let's go into Umbrella Academy Season 4.
Hello? Don't hang up. Victor.
Ben, just listen. There's something happening to you. And it's only gonna get worse.
You're on pace to end the world in about 48 hours.
24, actually.
Umbrella Academy is a show I have not had the opportunity yet to talk about on the podcast, but I absolutely love this show. It's hilarious to me that a show that manages to do the same thing 3 times, but effectively in other ways, where the world is going to end. First, it was Vanya, then it was the Kennedy assassination, and also Vanya, and then it was the end of the world and the hotel, which was called the Hotel Oblivion, and then Season 4, the world's going to end again. Everyone should do a glass of champagne or a lottery ticket because a rare opportunity where a Netflix show actually managed to get to tell its ending. Now, it was 6 episodes as opposed to 10, so 4 episodes shorter. And yes, that does hurt the season, but I think I'm going to be somebody who reviews this significantly more positively than a lot. It received generally mixed reviews. It's a phenomenal final season. What this show does in its last season is so succinct with being a final season. Now, that's going to sound like a really stupid statement, but what I mean from that is it's very rare to effectively end a show and please everybody. It's impossible, I would argue, to some degree. There are phenomenal series and series finales that are also phenomenal duds. This show doesn't do that. I finished this show, I binged it in 3 hours and 3 hours, and I sat with the ending for quite a bit, and days later, I came to this realization this is one of my favorite final seasons of any show of all time, because it makes the experience that we went on worth every second. It is the culmination of this story. It answers a criticism that a lot of people have had, which is, okay, we're doing an apocalypse. Why is the world always at stake? We actually get an answer, and it's one that makes sense. We learn that the Umbrella Academy are an anachronism to time. Their existence will always cause the end of the earth, to the point where it has happened so many times, we have fractured reality to the point where we have countless timelines, which is a through line in this film. The poster for this is of a subway station, and having Five and Lila go on this adventure where they experience all the timelines, connecting to the very beginning where we saw Five in the apocalypse of the very first season. And that relationship, that is an area where Lila and Five's relationship doesn't feel weird when they've spent 7 years with just themselves. If this had had 10 episodes, probably would have been explored even more. And the relationships to all of the characters come through, particularly where they get to have a realization that from the get-go, there was trauma that was suppressed from them from their Hargreaves with the passing of Ben, that he died because of a connection to another character, which would cause the end of the world. A mixing of the two comic booky components, the marigold and a new element, were going to cause the end of the universe. And the Umbrella Academy's constant push to prevent also continued a through line of, well, you stop this apocalypse, another one is going. It's a Ouroboros, or snake eating its own tail. This cycle of apocalypse is always going to continue. And even though these characters' relationships continue to explore, I would be remiss without mentioning how they handled the Victor to Vanya with Elliot Page in season 3 was absolutely spectacular. And these relationships come to an ending where we have every single character realizing the only way that they can truly save their world or the universe is to remove themselves from it. Even though their loved ones continue, and I'd like to know what the paradoxal bootstrap theory on how that works is, but removed from that, they realize we need to allow ourselves to be erased from the timeline in order to reset and have a quote-unquote sacred timeline. There, I connected to Marvel. Everybody happy? But that resolution feels earned, where we have explored 3 Apocalypse with these characters. They have seen who they can be, who they will be, or who they could be. And those dynamics and that conclusion feels succinct, and it feels earned. Is it rushed? Again, this season is 4 hours shorter than it probably want to be. So in terms of pacing, we're moving at quite a clip. At times, potentially, it can feel a little meanderiness. I found that to be one of the only real negatives I had with the season. I would be very, very curious for somebody who just binges all 4 of this now that the show is concluded. I'm somebody where if I'm watching a show and it just gets canceled, it's very rare for me to actually finish because the show didn't get an ending. As I said, Umbrella Academy did. So I'm curious if somebody just decides to watch this and shotgun through all of it. How do you feel with the ending? But it being a 5-year journey with these characters and exploring the journeys they've gone on and coming to this conclusion was one that I thought was earned. And it was one that I didn't feel disappointed by, which again, it's very rare to do that with a series finale. Seeing all the characters who had been killed or lost from time at the end with something I learned, which was the original version of I Think We're Alone Now in this season, it was really nice. It was obviously one of the most viral moments from the very first season. Again, this show's use of music was spectacular as always. I really enjoyed, as a father of young children, the use of Baby Shark. And the dynamics are explored are interesting ways. Diego and Lila's relationship, things being boring because they're no longer the people that they were, but seeing what truly matters to them actually had nothing to do with who they were as heroes or extraordinary people, was nice. Five as a character is somebody that probably had the most interesting journey from the get-go, given his experience living in an apocalypse all this time, but the family being united over a shared goal and ultimately the sacrifice that leads to a better world is a true story of heroes, which the Umbrella Academy should be remembered for. Now, this might be the shortest review in probably this portion of the episode. It's a show that I probably now, because it has a conclusion, will rewatch. I'm sure there are elements of this that I missed. Maybe things were laid out in the beginning, maybe they weren't, but Stephen Blackman manages to make this experience feel rewarding for the investment of the previous 3 seasons, which I commend him for. And regardless of whatever hurdles they may have faced in making this season, it does seem to have a little bit of a lower budget. The sets or locations that they shoot on had less people in them, and we had less supporting characters and less notable supporting characters. But overall, the exploration was really interesting. Having characters who believe they've experienced multiple timelines and things bleeding together, fitting into that conspiracy theory nature that has become so prevalent in our lives, it was a really interesting, again, reflection of what's going on now. Something similar to what The Boys does. It less extreme, but also more extreme, because ultimately we lose the Umbrella Academy to a giant tentacle, marigold, other monster, also known as the Cleanse, which I really enjoyed it. I do. I am very positive on this season, and I've been listening to all of the music for these shows for the last week or so. So I really do recommend watching this show. It's really weird. It has a very unique perspective, and it's a rewarding watch from start to finish. So I would recommend watching the Umbrella Academy. All right. The last thing in this review, which will be my review of Watchmen Chapter 1, which was available for digital rental on all your digital rental stores.
October 13th, 1985. On Friday night, a comedian died in New York.
I want all of the listeners to know that I am reviewing Watchmen Chapter 1 for one reason only. And that is because one of my diehard listeners, Jermaine, loves DC, and I know he would have wanted me to talk about this, so I have watched it. I have seen it. Jermaine, this review is dedicated to you. I have read Watchmen. I have my copy. My copy is right here. I purchased it prior to watching the live action film. And it's really interesting because all of the creatives behind this are people that I absolutely love. Brandon Vietti has worked on some of my favorite animated things of all time. He directed Batman Under the Red Hood. He was one of the brains behind Young Justice. Arguably the greatest DC, no, dare I say, one of the greatest superhero shows of all time. That is how good Young Justice is. Was behind this. J. Michael Straczynski was the screenwriter. It's a very interesting film. And what I'll say from that is what's most interesting in seeing an adaptation to this. Watchmen is one of the most highly regarded graphic novels in the history of the art form. And because of that, there were a lot of eyes on the Zack Snyder adaptation. And even amongst all the criticism Zack Snyder's received over his filmography, one everybody says is he's a visual storyteller. And significant amounts of pages were recreated in live action, which was especially interesting in adapting this into the animation art form. They chose to do a hybrid of CGI cel-shaded with 2D layering on top of it. There may be some comparison to films that have come out recently, such as the Spider-Verses or Ninja Turtles, Mutant Mayhem, and it would be completely unfair to compare those films and those budgets to likely what this received. And this may sound negative, and by no means do I mean it to sound this way, but Watchmen Chapter 1 is that. It is half of Watchmen. It is adapted very well, in my opinion. Some of the voice work is really well done and executed in a way where it does not sound like the movie, and I don't believe that they were likely shown the movie. They were probably given the script pages, look at the graphic novel for their inspiration. But as you would have heard in the clip leading into this, Titus Welliver, who's done great work as a voice actor, he was very, very good in Batman Long Halloween as, I believe he was, Carmine Falcone. He was great in that. Matthew Rhys as Dan or Night Owl 2 is phenomenal. I like Katie Sackhoff's work as Silk Spectre 2. Troy Baker fits in Adrian and Ozymandias really, really well. Shout out to Adrienne Barbeau, who was Catwoman in Batman the Animated Series and all the other DCAU appearances. A lot of that works really well. Rick Wasserman's Edward Blake is not one, and again, it didn't need to be Jeffrey Dean Morgan, but I didn't find it necessarily fitting with the character. Again, it's all personal preferences. Ultimately, Watchmen Chapter 1 is a faithful adaptation of half of the book. The integration of the Black Freighter I found really interesting, where the narration, similar to how you would read it in a comic, is done over top of what is happening in the actual Watchmen world, as well as only seeing it as still comic book pages, which is interesting because when you're reading it as a comic, everything is still. For the live action ultimate cut, it is animated as opposed to also being live action. And then in this, they are still images being shown over top of the animated one. Unfortunately, because of the restraints of the budget, I found the animation, particularly of the texturing of the CGI models, to be really underwhelming. Now, again, their actual models do look like the comic. They look like 3D versions. And watching the behind the scenes for this was really interesting because they said they tried to put almost a film grain layer over top of it. And if they did do that, it would have been really cool if they maybe increased not even the contrast, but increased that slider for the grain to even give it a more aged look, where obviously the visual design is very much of the era in the 80s, but I've seen Watchmen, the live action film. I've read the graphic novel. I loved the HBO show, and I read some of Before Watchmen. And as I said with my review or trailer reaction, what I found most interesting is, why did they make this? I get Watchmen is popular, totally understandable, and I may feel differently. This is a really interesting state where this is half of a story. It tries to end in a compelling way where this portion is done, and to some degree it is, but it's maybe 4 volumes or 4 issues of the 8 that made the comic. And because of that, or 12, it's probably 6. It's interesting. It is something I wish I would have watched without having seen the live action adaptation, because my brain probably wouldn't be as familiar, particularly with the still images that Zach is able to use in the live action film. I'm not saying one is better than the other. This has more of a faithful design because it is able to do so in animation, but because of the adaptations we've had already, this is going to feel less familiar, which is just the case, it being 2024 when this is coming out, 40 years after the release of the graphic novel. I think it's good. Everything is executed fairly well outside of a couple of the choices for the voice actors that, in my opinion, don't necessarily fit with their roles, but it is what it is. Maybe after part 2 or chapter 2, I'll feel differently. So that will do it for my Watchmen Chapter 1 review. I will talk about Chapter 2 when it comes out later on. I don't believe it has a release date yet. So whenever that comes out, I will be watching it, and you can hear that review when it comes out. Let's jump into question of the week and listener responses.
Can I ask you a question? Just fun?
There's something I've been meaning to ask you.
I ask the questions, you answer the questions.
Why do you ask questions to which you already know the answers?
Did that count as a question?
Yes.
Damn it.
Last week's question of the week was, if you were on a private island, what meal would you eat repeatedly? Let's see what the responses were. Scotty Cameron wrote in, it would probably be pizza. Okay, Scotty, here's my follow-up question. What kind? Because there's a lot of variety. You can't just say pizza. I want to know what the toppings are. Dylan Pollock of Movies to Watch Before You Die wrote in, sounds very Stepford Wivesy meets Don't Worry Darling. Also, for my meal, I would choose pizza and therefore all different kinds or specialty slices. No, Dylan, I just said you can't do that. Or functioning airplane mode made of chocolate and licorice, which I could use to fly off the island. Doesn't count. And then Dylan has a follow-up comment, which is, my God, I have just realized that this will melt as I fly too close to the sun and literally become Icarus. Okay, Dylan, I'm glad you realized that licorice will not help you fly. Greetings from Keen Machine. Greetings, Kyle. I have a two-sided answer to your question about eating only one food on a private island. If by food you mean one specific item of produce, I'd probably say chicken. If by food you mean one dish, I would probably say ramen. While high in sodium, it has proteins, veggies, starch, and also it's just always enjoyable to eat. Anyways, keep it keen, Keen Machine. Sent via my steam-powered telegraph machine. I love ramen, so that's a really great answer. Thank you for that. Austin on TikTok said bananas. Okay. And Stephanie Little wrote in, if I can use other stuff to jazz it up in different ways, oatmeal. Okay. Or if I can have only one meal, as in it would be pierogies with sour cream. That's a great answer. If you would like to submit your answers for question of the week, you can email the podcast, filmreelistspod@gmail.com, or you can comment below when the question of the week video goes live. It typically goes up on Thursday, so keep an eye for that. This week's question of the week is an interesting one, which is because of specifically Umbrella Academy and The Boys, what is your favorite final season of a television show? That's my question. I'm very curious. I expect a multitude of answers to this, so I'm really looking forward to that. And next week's episode will be a review of Beetlejuice, the long-awaited Beetlejuice sequel. I'm really glad it's not called Beetlejuice 2. Well done naming your movie. That review, as always, will be released on Monday. If you haven't already, please give the podcast a follow, a 5-star review on your podcast platform. My name is Kyle Naranya, and I can't wait to see you next time.